Welcome to Tibet This Week, where we bring you weekly news edition on His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Tibet, and the Central Tibetan Administration. These are the headlines. The Scottish Government reaffirmed its support for the Tibetan people. The Central Tibetan Administration leadership arrives in Tokyo for 9th World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet. Sikyong concludes Tibet Advocacy in Canada. Representative Chukki leads Advocacy meeting in Frankfurt for Tibet. Tibet Policy Institute launches in-depth study on mass relocation of Tibetan farmers and nomads from Nagchu to Sinburi in Lhoka. The Scottish Government has reaffirmed its support for the religious freedom and human rights for Tibetan people, particularly on the issue of reincarnation of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. During the Scottish Parliament session last Thursday, Ross John Greer, member of the Scottish Parliament, raised concerns around the Chinese interference in the reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Scottish Government's plan to commemorate the upcoming 90th birthday of His Holiness. In response, Caucup Stewart, Minister of Equalities, extended warm wishes to His Holiness and the Buddhist community and expressed the Scottish Government's support on religious freedom and human rights and stressed that there should not be external interference on choosing the next Dalai Lama.
The most important issue for Buddhists across Scotland and the world celebrating the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday is the matter of his reincarnation. When the Panchen Lama died 30 years ago this month, the Chinese government immediately kidnapped the 6-year-old boy chosen as his successor and the boy's family, then installed their own false Panchen Lama in his place. Buddhists fear that they will attempt the same with the next Dalai Lama. The Scottish Government enjoys positive relations with the leaders of many faith groups, and His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama has made a number of visits to Scotland. Does the Minister agree that it's for Tibetan Buddhists to choose the 15th Dalai Lama in line with their traditions and teachings, and that the Scottish Government would only recognise a Dalai Lama appointed on these terms?
Minister.
I'd like to thank Ross Greer for bringing these issues to the Chamber. I am aware that he travelled to India in April and met with the Dalai Lama. The Scottish Government supports the principles of religious freedom and human rights. It believes that the Tibetan Buddhist community should have the right to choose the next Dalai Lama without external interference.
The leadership of the Central Tibetan Administration has arrived in Tokyo ahead of the 9th World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet, marking a significant step in international engagement on the Tibetan issue. The delegation includes Speaker Khyentse Nam Tempe, Sikyong Tsering, Deputy Speaker Thomas Ring Tekhang, accompanied by the representative of the Liaison Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for Japan and East Asia. One of the delegation's first official engagements was a high-level meeting with the Japanese Parliamentary Support Group for Tibet at the National Diet Building. The meeting was chaired by Eriko Yamatani and moderated by General Secretary Hiroshi Yamada, with the presence of Yoshiko Sakurai, President of the Japan Institute for National Fundamentals. During the meeting, Sikyong Tsering highlighted the worsening human rights situation inside Tibet under Chinese Communist Party rule and urged global leaders to refrain from using the term Xizang in reference to Tibet. He also emphasized the importance of international recognition of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's 4 principal commitments and called upon lawmakers to pass resolutions honoring His Holiness's life and legacy on his upcoming 90th birthday. The CDA leadership extended invitations to Japanese lawmakers to attend the Tibetan Democracy Day in celebrations in September and will meet with local Tibetan community in Tokyo on June 1.
And they're forcing their allies to use the word Xizang. It's not just changing a name and also the historical background behind the name Tibet or Pe in Tibetan. From the Chinese government perspective, Xizang means only Tibet Autonomous Region, which is about half of Tibet. So I urge politicians here and also the media not to use the word Xizang. Chinese government from the beginning of this century have been hoping for this Dalai Lama to die. And His Holiness always has a very amiable way of responding to these difficult questions. His Holiness says if Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation, they should study Tibetan Buddhism first and believe in the concept of life after death. So this July, we are holding a conference of all the Tibetan Buddhist leaders in Dharamsala for 3 days. His Holiness will meet with all of them. and most probably he will issue a statement during those times. So in line with those statements, Japanese Parliament group can also issue statements in support of that.
Sikyong Penpa Tsering is scheduled to travel to Osaka on May 31 to engage with local parliamentarians and visit Seifu Gakuin School. Starting last Saturday, Sikyong held 4 separate meetings with the local Tibetan community in Vancouver Island, Canada, Tibetan community from the Greater Vancouver region, Tibetan youth in Calgary, and the local Tibetan community in Calgary over the course of 3 days. In all these meetings, Sikyong emphasized on the importance of middle-way approach, importance of the population digitalization as a crucial tool in governance, reflected on the collective resilience of the community, need for unity within the Tibetan diaspora, responsibility of the 16th Kashak and the younger Tibetan generation in upholding His Holiness the Dalai Lama's vision and to preserve our identity, religion and culture. On May 16th, Sikyong also attended a dinner reception hosted by the voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group Canada in his honor. With over 300 attendees, the event set a new benchmark for youth-led civic engagement within the Tibetan diaspora. With this, Sikyong Penpa Tsering of the Central Tibetan Administration concludes his official tour to the North America. Sikyong met with 21 House of Representatives and Senators, U.S. State Department officials, 4 Canadian members of Parliament, former political leaders, experts, and with local Tibetan communities in 9 different locations in the U.S. and Canada. Last Tuesday and Wednesday, Representative Chukki of the Office of Tibet, Geneva, accompanied by Kelsang Gelson, former Special Envoy and Advisor to the Permanent Strategy Committee, and Pinso Topke, UN Advocacy Officer from the Office of Tibet, Geneva, held a series of meetings for Tibet at Frankfurt. In separate meetings, they met with Frank Auth, President of Friends for Friends in Frankfurt, and Dieter Bein, Chief Protocol Officer of the State of Hessen, with Roland Koch, former German politician and legal expert, and concluded their visit with a stop at Tibet House, Germany. In these meetings, the team led by Chukki spoke on the urgency of religious freedom and human rights situation inside Tibet, the increasing significance and the need for Europe and international support to spotlight China's growing aggression in Tibet, and the upcoming global 90th birthday celebration of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. At Tibet House, Germany, they discussed on promoting Tibetan culture and religion and toured a photo exhibition featuring His Holiness the Dalai Lama. On Wednesday this week, the Tibet Policy Institute, affiliated with the Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration, held the launch of an in-depth study on the mass relocation of Tibetan farmers and nomads from 3 districts of Nagchu Prefecture to Sinburi village, Khongkar County, Lhoka. Although the Chinese government justifies this relocation as a very high-altitude ecological relocation, it is a pretext primarily aimed at population control, with alarming repercussions for the Tibetan people. The launch was attended by Secretary Kama Chuing from DIIR, along with TPI Director Tawa Tsering and Deputy Director Deba Gyaltsen Tsamla. Geshe Atong Rinchen Gyaltsen, member of the 17th Tibetan Parliament in Exile, and Gyaltsen Chukki, a Chinese language tutor at Nobulinga Institute, were also invited to the event due to their intimate familiarity with Nagchu, their hometown. TPI researchers Dr. Tsawang Dorji Jeshong and Lobsang Teshi, who spent approximately 6 months researching this issue, were also among the guests on the dais to address the event. That is all for this week's edition of Tibet This Week. See you next week.